Out-of-control benders, playing with loaded guns, and bearing it all on stage. Rock stars have a reputation for their hard partying ways, but these musicians took sex, drugs, and rock and roll to new extremes. While original Van Halen lead singer David Lee Roth preferred to occupy his free time with cocaine, Eddie Van Halen was way more interested in booze. He told Billboard in 2015, "I didn't drink to party. Alcohol and cocaine were private things to me. I would use them for work. The blow keeps you awake, and the alcohol lowers your inhibitions." Van Halen's battle with the bottle started early. He began drinking regularly at age 12 and would show up drunk in high school. He told Rolling Stone that the death of his alcoholic father led him to briefly kick booze in the late 80s, but that was a relatively short period. By 2004, Van Halen told Billboard he'd become an angry drunk. That side of his personality manifested during a Tucson, Arizona stop on a Van Halen reunion tour featuring singer Sammy Hagar. In Read My Uncensored Life in Rock, Hagar called it one of the worst shows the band had ever done, writing, "Eddie played so bad. He smashed his favorite guitar to pieces, sprayed shrapnel into the crowd." That was the last time Hagar saw Van Halen, and he attributed the guitarist's problems to his issues with alcohol.
Yeah, it breaks your heart. I can see that it breaks your heart.
Van Halen ultimately sought treatment for his alcoholism in 2007. He died in 2020 due to complications from throat cancer. Ozzy Osbourne is responsible for some of the most unbelievable rock legends of all time, but most of them happen to be true. For example, he really did take a bite out of a bat on stage during a concert, and he was so drunk and annoyed during a record label meeting that he bit the head off a live dove. And that's just what Ozzy does at work. When he was enjoying his personal time during his 1984 concert tour with Motley Crue as his opening act, he performed some especially depraved and disgusting acts. According to the Motley Crue memoir, The Dirt, and later dramatized in the Netflix biopic of the same name, the band members and Ozzy were hanging out at a hotel pool in Lakeland, Florida. After asking for some cocaine and not receiving any, Osbourne took a straw, got on the ground, and snorted a line of ants. One gross act deserves another, and for Osbourne's next trick, in full view of women and families, he urinated all over the pool deck. It gets worse. Osbourne then went back down to the ground and licked it up. In the end, it was just one more infamous substance for Osbourne to add to his list.
It was fun at the time, but then we all just sort of it's not a very good idea anymore.
So you have a more stable life now?
No.
Maybe the most infamous hard-partying hard rocker of all time, Keith Richards has defied modern medicine by still being alive despite his well-documented and copious drug use. Chasing a high has nearly killed the Rolling Stones guitarist a couple of times. He got heavy into heroin in the early 70s. A few years later, he claimed to have been poisoned with strychnine-laced heroin. "I was totally comatose, but I was totally awake. I could listen to everyone and they were like, 'He's dead, he's dead.' I was thinking, 'I'm not dead.'" Now, it's hard to pinpoint the craziest thing Keith Richards did, but it's probably the time he inhaled his father's ashes up his nose. Richards told the NME, "I snorted my father. He was cremated and I couldn't resist grinding him up with a little bit of blow. It went down pretty well and I'm still alive." While we'll never know the spiritual benefits of ingesting a parent, Richards did notice one interesting side effect.
They got me off.
Following a monumental run in the 70s, the Eagles split up in 1980 amid major band tension. Breaking the news to the band's crew fell to singer and drummer Don Henley, who invited everyone over to his home in Los Angeles on November 20th, 1980. After everyone departed, Henley felt so low and defeated that he arranged to have a sex worker come over to his house.
I was pretty lost, really, for a while there. I had a rough time with that.
When testifying about his past criminal activities during a separate legal matter, Henley told the Manhattan Supreme Court in 2024, "I wanted to forget what was going on. I wanted to escape the depression I was in. And a few hours later, a young woman arrived at my home." After exchanging some pleasantries, Henley and the young woman had some wine, and he brought out some cocaine upon request. After that, they went to sleep, and several hours later, Henley was awakened by loud sounds and found his companion in the middle of a seizure. The musician called 911, and paramedics revived the woman. The seizure was the symptom of an overdose of cocaine. When the woman left Henley's house later on, police arrested Henley, and he was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Henley claimed to have no idea that the sex worker was 16 years old. In the 70s, Alice Cooper was at his commercial and cultural peak. He was also a heavy drinker. He told Classic Rock in 2022, "Alcohol was my poison. I drank a Seagram's VO, a Canadian Rye with Coca-Cola, and beer. For me, beer was like air. I'd have a six-pack before noon." Cooper was also a charter member of the Hollywood Vampires, a drinking club in LA consisting entirely of famous people like Keith Moon and Ringo Starr. Cooper said, "It was on the road, with all that dead time, when I would really drink too much. I didn't have an off switch." Several times during his 1977 Lace and Whiskey tour, Cooper vomited blood. Following the incident, his wife and manager put together an intervention. Later that year, after an all-night drinking session, Cooper was admitted while hungover to Cornell Medical Center, a rehabilitation facility in New York. After a long battle with alcohol, he finally stopped drinking in 1983. He's been sober ever since.
I think I finally just got a point of just saying, I just don't want it anymore.
Even before he joined AC/DC, singer Bon Scott was known around the Adelaide, Australia rock scene for his excessive drinking. In 1974, he showed up drunk and angry to a practice session for his pre-AC/DC band, the Mount Lofty Strangers. He kept drinking and tried to fight his bandmates until he finally left on his motorcycle. On the way, he crashed the vehicle and sustained multiple injuries. Scott lay in a coma for 3 days, but he continued his drinking habits. On February 19, 1980, he met some friends at the Music Machine in London. Following several hours of continuous boozing, Scott was so drunk and exhausted that he couldn't find his way home. So he found a car parked near the Music Machine owned by a friend and went to sleep.
He wanted to go home. He wanted to be with his family. Unfortunately, he went for the bottle instead.
He never woke up. The next morning, the 33-year-old was found dead, covered in what was likely his own vomit. An autopsy determined that Scott died of an accidental overdose of alcohol. The Replacements are alternative rock cult heroes, known for catchy, crunchy classics like Can't Hardly Wait and I Will Dare. But the band is almost as legendary for its drinking. In 1986, the band was so drunk for its performance on Saturday Night Live that guitarist Bob Stinson performed an inebriated somersault, tearing his pants and exposing his bare backside. After the show, the Replacements destroyed their hotel room, and SNL producer Lorne Michaels got the bill, prompting him to ban the band from the late-night program. But even among the heavy-drinking Replacements, Stinson apparently outdrank everybody. Not long after the SNL incident, Stinson left the Replacements, and the other band members made him seek help for his substance abuse issues. Singer Paul Westerberg told the Pioneer Press, "We paid for him to go into treatment, and he got out and scored some drugs that day." Stinson kept up his hard partying ways. In February 1995, the guitarist died of organ failure at the very young age of 35. In the early 80s, Metallica's 4 members often drank copious amounts of alcohol, so much so that it earned itself the nickname Alcoholica.
Our whole existence pretty much was for guitar dominating the world and getting liquored up.
But while James Hetfield, Cliff Burton, and Lars Ulrich tended to get wild and obnoxious when they drank, lead guitarist Dave Mustaine was different. Mustaine told Loudwire, "When you're around a lot of people that like to drink and get silly, they just want to have fun. I would drink and have fun until someone would refute something I had said. And then that was war, baby. I'd be aggressive and confrontational because I was a violent drunk." The rest of Metallica could only take so much. On the morning of April 11, 1983, the others abruptly woke the sleeping and very hungover Mustaine to tell him that he'd been fired from the group. Even worse, they'd been secretly working on finding a replacement, and they'd already hired a new guitarist, Kirk Hammett. Mustaine told Metal Hammer, "I would have done the same thing as Metallica did. I had a problem with alcohol, and it cost me my job and cost me 2 very dear friends." Oasis, led by frequently at odds brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher, ruled the 90s British rock scene. By July 2000, the band was so popular that it filled London's gigantic Wembley Stadium for 2 nights. But the group was starting to fracture under the weight of its own success. 2 members had just left the band. Oasis had departed its label, and Liam was upset over his divorce and constantly fighting with his brother. He coped by self-medicating and got very wasted before he took the stage for the first of the Wembley Stadium shows.
Whoever has won. I'm going to get up, put my clothes on, meet you in the booze.
During Oasis's set, Liam repeatedly muttered bad words while singing and even improvised insults directed at his former wife and his brother. At one point, Liam refused to sing at all until some women in the audience obeyed his request to take off their shirts. When the concert ended, the rest of Oasis left the stage in a hurry, but Liam hung around, daring the audience to take off before he did. He later admitted that being drunk on stage was something he did as a habit, but he stopped after the Wembley shows. In 1976, Neil Young joined the band on stage at their Thanksgiving Day farewell concert. He played Helpless with the group, which was included in The Last Waltz, the 1978 concert film directed by Martin Scorsese. Immediately before he took the stage, Young had snorted a great deal of cocaine, and while playing Helpless, a big chunk of white powder rested in his nostril, fully visible, which Young was seemingly unaware of. It was so unmistakable in the footage that Scorsese had to have the film carefully treated, with a new trick devised by his crew of editors so that Young's cocaine-laden nose wouldn't show up in the movie. In the late 60s and early 70s, Joe Cocker became a star by reinventing well-known songs through the prism of a bluesy, soulful growl. On stage, he transfixed audiences not just with his vocal performances, but his wild, jerky, and unpredictable movements. It seemed to many that Cocker was intoxicated, and he often was. His regular ingestion of large amounts of drugs and alcohol added to the Joe Cocker experience. While Cocker would attain sobriety in the early 80s, it followed a spectacular flop of a concert in August 1974. After 4 years of not making much music, Cocker was primed for a comeback with a concert at Los Angeles' Roxy Theater in front of an audience stacked with pals, associates, and some of his biggest fans. John Rockwell of the New York Times wrote, "Mr. Cocker embarrassed and saddened his closest friends in the music business with a rambling, incoherent fiasco." Before the show began, Cocker reportedly drank so much that he vomited during the performance. He rallied enough to try to sing songs despite not remembering the lyrics, and then took a seat on the ground and refused to perform his best-known song, a cover of the Beatles' With a Little Help from My Friends. Throughout his career, Kid Rock has celebrated partying and hard drinking, but in the 2010s, he aligned himself with conservative politics. In 2024, Rolling Stone reporter David Peisner wanted to explore that shift, and he secured a 90-minute interview with the rocker. That meeting lasted well into the night, with Kid Rock getting drunker, angrier, and more unpredictable as it progressed. Kid Rock began the interview with sipping some white wine, then switched over to whiskey with Diet Coke while the political discussion grew more heated and disconnected. Peisner wrote, "He proceeds to drain at least 3 or 4 of them in pretty quick succession. He's sitting in a dark leather chair, shouting at me about something or other, when he reaches behind the seat, pulls out a black handgun, and waves it around to make some sort of point." Kid Rock mentioned that he had guns all over his property and that he wasn't afraid to use them, and then he went back to talking politics and peppering his remarks with the N-word. After making Peisner watch YouTube videos of his own performances, he fixed up another cocktail and made some racially tinged remarks, challenged the reporter to a fight, and then drunkenly drove him back to his car on an all-terrain vehicle.
You have to be in a state of mind that music can put you in with its hypnotic quality.
About 10,000 fans filed into the Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami on March 1, 1969 for a performance by The Doors, led by charismatic lead singer Jim Morrison. Between songs, if he cared to sing them at all or just botched them, he slurred his way through spoken interludes. About an hour into the show, the visibly intoxicated Morrison reportedly yelled out, "Let's have a good time, let's have a revolution, everybody come up on stage, come up and touch me." Morrison also doused himself in champagne while welcoming around 60 fans up on the stage. He then asked the audience if they want to see his At that point, the concert promoter took the microphone away from the singer and implored the audience to return to their seats. Meanwhile, Morrison shoved some fans around, reportedly mimed a sexual act, and allegedly withdrew his genitals from his pants. After more shoving and screaming, the concert was over when the promoter got the amps unplugged and the house lights turned on. As Morrison left the stage, witnesses claim he said, "Uh-oh, I think I exposed myself." There was legal fallout for his actions. Local authorities issued arrest warrants for Morrison on 6 charges, including indecent exposure and public drunkenness. Though he was convicted and sentenced for indecent exposure, he was posthumously pardoned in 2010. Shane MacGowan started the Celtic rock band The Pogues, but was fired by the group in 1991 because his addictions made him so unreliable. MacGowan began regularly drinking at the age of 5, when his parents gave alcohol to him. Writing in his book, A Drink with Shane MacGowan, the singer said of his nightly bedtime ritual, "You soon get used to 2 bottles of Guinness a night." By the time he was 8, MacGowan had moved away from beer in favor of whiskey at the urging of an uncle. He once claimed that he was almost constantly drunk from the age of 14 onward. Later in adulthood, he'd added heroin to his regimen of substances. MacGowan's voracious use of alcohol, heroin, and other substances led directly to him losing all of his teeth. His last real one fell away in 2008. MacGowan wore dentures for 7 years and got implants in 2015, a year before he found sobriety. In 2023, he died of pneumonia at age 65. British rocker Billy Idol took punk mainstream in the early 1980s. Well, he had a punk background and his pop rock had a punk flair to it, but he really embodied the quintessential punk look with his spiked and bleached hair, constant sneer, and torn-up shirts. Idol may have dressed like a young punk, but he partied like a classic rock star. While the likes of Led Zeppelin and The Who famously trashed hotel rooms, Idol absolutely destroyed the penthouse suite of a hotel in Bangkok, Thailand.
No way.
He took residence in the palatial quarters in 1989, staying for 3 weeks and refusing to leave. The entire time was a non-stop party full of booze, drugs, and women. It got so bad that the hotel's management ordered him to leave, but he wouldn't go. So they were forced to call in the local military, who shot him with a tranquilizer dart and carried him out. When all was said and done, Idol received a bill for the damages, which added up to $250,000.
No way!
The Who's Keith Moon is one of the greatest rock drummers of all time, yet Moon is arguably more memorable for another rock and roll achievement. He's the guy who made trashing a hotel room a quintessential part of the rock star experience. Moon celebrated his 21st birthday in 1967 during a tour stop in Flint, Michigan. By the time he hit the stage that night, he'd been drinking all day, but he was just getting started. Back at the local Holiday Inn, The Who threw a birthday party. Moon started a food fight, and then, while running around without pants or underwear, he tripped and knocked out half a tooth. He was so drunk that the emergency dentist wouldn't give him any anesthetic for the repair surgery. Meanwhile, the party had descended into a riot, and The Who received a bill for the damages in the tens of thousands. Moon also enjoyed personally ruining smaller rooms of other hotels. It was a tour habit of the drummers to use cherry bombs and other small explosives to blow up bathroom toilets. That is, when he wasn't busy blowing up his drum sets. In 1978, and after a few hospitalizations, Moon attempted to quit drinking. A doctor prescribed him medication to help him deal with withdrawal symptoms. In a sad twist, Moon overdosed on the drug and died. He was only 32 years old. Led Zeppelin generated a huge sound out of just 4 musicians, only 3 of whom played instruments. A big part of Zepp's extremely influential heavy sound is the thundering yet precise drum work of John Bonzo Bonham, who charged the band along as he pounded away on classics like Immigrant Song and Rock and Roll. Bonham was just as hard charging in some of the non-musical parts of his life, particularly when it came to alcohol. Like Keith Moon and many of music's other heavy hitters, it was tough for Bonham to live the life of a rock drummer and still stay in control.
Drum! 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 In control.
Bonham was a serious drinker, and not just in party or social situations. In late September 1980, Led Zeppelin convened at guitarist Jimmy Page's home for rehearsals. While working, Bonham helped himself to quadruple vodka shots. The drummer imbibed somewhere in the area of 40 servings of alcohol and ultimately blacked out. Bonham was so intoxicated that when his body tried to throw up all that toxic alcohol, he couldn't wake up. Bonham choked on his own vomit and passed away. For decades, the Playboy Mansion was literally party central. Playboy founder Hugh Hefner lived in the sprawling Los Angeles estate with any number of playmates. High-profile guests came around most every night of the week to enjoy wine, women, and song. It was essentially a fancy flophouse. a comfortable place where celebrities could enjoy themselves without judgment and freely engage in whatever debauchery they could imagine. And yet, the legendary Dave Navarro, guitarist for Jane's Addiction and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, found some things that were too much for even the Playboy Mansion's unofficial anything goes policy. In 2004, the guitarist published Don't Try This at Home, a year in the life of Dave Navarro, recounting his exploits from 1998 to 1999. In the book, Navarro wrote about a visit with multiple women to a room in the Playboy Mansion. When the women started undressing, Navarro bruised himself preparing and injecting a dose of heroin. With the blood that ran back into the syringe, Navarro tried to write on the wall. While Navarro notes that he cleaned it off, it still got him kicked out and forever banned from the mansion, which is pretty rough because once anyone or anything has had a taste of the Playboy Mansion, they cling on to it for dear life.
Why don't I just keep him here for a little while until he calms down?
Most tales of rock and roll debauchery end with a rock star passed out, more often than not in a destroyed hotel room. However, the events of December 8, 1984 are among the darkest days in rock history, and certainly the worst in the life of hard rock band Motley Crue, a time when the partying got so intense that it left a body count. Crue lead singer Vince Neil had been drinking at a beach house for a few days almost totally uninterrupted. Late on the night of December 8th, he decided to make a liquor store run to acquire more booze. However, he was already very intoxicated, and he took Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle along for the ride. While driving down a winding road, Neil lost control of the vehicle and smashed into another car. While all parties were injured, Razzle got the worst of it. The 24-year-old was declared dead on arrival, and Neil was arrested for drunk driving. While the intoxicant of choice for Motley Crue's Vince Neil was alcohol, bandmate Nikki Sixx enjoyed harder pursuits. In 1983, Sixx crashed his Porsche and damaged his shoulder. He got really into the painkillers doctors prescribed, but those didn't do the trick for long. Sixx wrote in Motley Crue's memoir, The Dirt, "Heroin began to consume me, first to kill the pain of the shoulder and then later to kill the pain of life, which is the pain of not being on heroin." By 1986, Sixx's heroin use was an open secret in the band's orbit, and his management team put him in a rehab center, which he bailed on by jumping out of a second-story window. On December 23, 1987, Sixx enjoyed a night of cocaine with members of Guns N' Roses, Megadeth, and Rat before retiring to a room at the Franklin Plaza Hotel, where Sixx was injected by his drug dealer with a lethal dose of heroin. Yes, lethal. Sixx lost consciousness, and a friend called an ambulance. After being actually clinically dead for 2 minutes, Sixx sprang back to life thanks to 2 adrenaline injections administered by a paramedic. Rod Stewart apparently faced a conundrum during his 1970s peak. He wanted to keep his signature just raspy enough voice exactly as it was, but he also wanted to enjoy the spoils of the success that his voice brought him. In other words, how could Rod Stewart both sing his heart out every night, but also ingest a small mountain of cocaine during the after party? If he took it the old-fashioned way, snorting lines of the stuff up his nose, that would damage his nasal passage, and in turn his throat, and subsequently his famous voice. Fortunately for Stewart, he devised other ways to get cocaine into his bloodstream.
And I, for one, still don't understand the chemistry of it, and never will, for as long as I live.
Stewart wrote in Rod the Autobiography, "We started buying anti-cold capsules from the chemists and separating the 2 halves of the capsules, replacing their contents with a pinch of cocaine. Then that pill would go up, well, where most people don't want to put pills. According to Stewart, they would dissolve effortlessly into the system." That's right, Rod Stewart made and used homemade cocaine suppositories. Although this method worked for Stewart, his suppository solution is a much trickier procedure for many people.
You know, because sometimes you have it, sometimes it escapes. Some people never find it in their entire lives.
Most of the stories about Guns N' Roses concern the band's iconic, notorious singer Axl Rose and lead guitarist Slash. But plugging away alongside them for years, both on stage and in the sordid halls of rock and roll legend, was Duff McKagan. The bassist celebrated and dealt with the pressures of his success with a 1-2 punch of alcohol and cocaine. McKagan routinely consumed a half-gallon of vodka daily. Put another way, that's more than 40 shots of the stuff. At one point, McKagan realized that drinking so much vodka every day probably wasn't so good for his health, so he traded out spirits for wine. In the long run, that wasn't so good for him either, because in 1994, McKagan's pancreas burst. Doctors told him that if he were to have just one more drink, he'd die. McKagan told The Independent, "My mom had Parkinson's and I saw her come in crying, seeing her youngest son on tubes. That turned me around."
And that was like all the rehab I needed.
Due to their love of illicit substances, particularly heroin and cocaine, Aerosmith's Steven Tyler and Joe Perry earned the nickname the Toxic Twins. The cred to back up that nickname was confirmed by no less than arguably the most drug-addled rock star of all time. Tyler told Rolling Stone in 1990 that, "Jerry Garcia says that we were the druggiest bunch of guys the Grateful Dead ever saw. So that gives you some idea of how and crazy we were." Tyler claims that he and some of his bandmates were so into that rock and roll excess that they didn't even have the energy to indulge in the other. That's something he regretted. Tyler said, "While I'm still bummed I didn't get all the sex I could have had in the 70s, we were more interested in the finer blends of cocaine," which, by the way, was laced with opium. At one point during his journey to sobriety, Tyler must have taken a good look at himself and had some seriously profound thoughts.
That is E to the Z ooh tweedly disgusting!
You haven't heard me sing Diddly Ding yet.
In many ways, Kiss is the definitive rock band. Most of their songs are arena-ready anthems about rock and roll itself, and their stage show is full of pyrotechnics. And while they were rocking and rolling all night, they also partied every day. Particularly longtime guitarist Ace Frehley, also known as Space Ace. He started drinking at the age of 13 and spent most of his life struggling with addiction before kicking his habits for good in 2006. His moment of clarity happened when his daughter called him out on how he'd started drinking again and implored him to quit. Frehley's drinking days featured some notably audacious booze-fueled moments. In 1979, while Kiss was on Tom Snyder's Tomorrow Show, a visibly intoxicated Frehley grumbled and drunkenly joked his way through the appearance, to the annoyance of his bandmates.
But you're kind of like a spaceman, huh?
No, actually, I'm a plumber. On the side.
There was also the time the band was riding in a limousine and Frehley chugged a bottle of perfume after being told it technically contained alcohol. Despite his wild ways, he's still alive and kicking. In the 1960s, Fleetwood Mac was just one of many British blues rock groups. But in the next decade, they adopted a softer sound and became one of the most definitive rock bands of all time. Their new direction was smoother, chiller, and groovier, and it totally belied how the group was fueled by cocaine. Drummer Mick Fleetwood first tried the drug around the time that the band was recording their 1975 self-titled album. As the group got bigger, the drug indulgence increased, to the point that cocaine was purchased in bulk, written off as an expense, and handed out in packets to band and crew members alike each night. Fleetwood once made a list of rock music's biggest spenders, specifically for how much money he'd spent on cocaine. That figure was somewhere in the area of $60 million. He and some associates eventually determined exactly how much cocaine that was. By figuring that he snorted 1/8 of an ounce every day for 20 years, that works out to a 7-mile-long line of cocaine. Mick Fleetwood wasn't the only cocaine enthusiast in Fleetwood Mac. Stevie Nicks used to consume the drug with as much fervor as she brings to wearing shawls and singing spooky songs. As she described it to Rolling Stone in 2015, all of us were drug addicts, but there was a point where I was the worst drug addict. I was a girl, I was fragile, and I was doing a lot of coke. And I had that hole in my nose, so it was dangerous.
I used to carry a gram of cocaine in my boot at all times. And it was the first thing I thought of when I woke up in the morning.
By 1985, Nicks had reportedly spent roughly $1 million on cocaine. That's evidently enough to literally blow a hole through a nose, as Nicks snorted so much that it left an interior opening and led to regular nosebleeds. By 1987, her body reacted to the constant influx of drugs, cocaine and otherwise, with blackouts and falls. A doctor eventually told her that if she continued to snort cocaine at the rate at which she'd been accustomed, she'd suffer a brain hemorrhage or another fatal health defect. but she nevertheless kept going and only quit after seeking help at the Betty Ford Center following an intervention from her bandmates. Motorhead is a slang term that means a person who takes a lot of amphetamines. Thus, the band Motorhead was aptly named, as frontman Lemmy Kilmister was a longtime amphetamine enthusiast. In his memoir, White Line Fever, he recalled the time when he accidentally ingested what he thought was amphetamine, but was actually poisonous belladonna. It was only a teaspoon, but that was about 200 times the amount for an overdose. He passed out and woke up in a hospital, where a doctor told him that he was about an hour away from death had he not been treated. In 1975, Lemmy was arrested at the Canadian-American border with amphetamine sulfate in his pants. After a night in jail, the charge was dropped. He was busted for cocaine, not speed, and was released on that technicality. Lemmy also liked booze, as he drank a bottle of Jack Daniels every day for decades. As he aged, he had to scale back, partly because it wasn't good for his diabetes. In his later years, he lived in Los Angeles, a few blocks from the Rainbow Bar and Grill. He was such a frequent customer that after his death in 2015, the restaurant held a memorial service and erected a statue of him. Green Day has evolved quite a bit from its early days as a sloppy punk band. The power trio, led by singer-songwriter Billie Joe Armstrong, has gone on to produce some very un-punk things, like a concept album, power ballads, and a Broadway musical. But they've still retained their punk spirit, which was abundantly clear during their set at the 2012 iHeartRadio Festival. They were on a crowded bill that also featured pop stars like Taylor Swift and Rihanna. All acts were required to adhere to a performance schedule and were alerted when the time in their set was running low via an onstage monitor. When a 1-minute remaining message flashed up during Green Day's set, Armstrong came undone and launched into a profanity-laced tirade. He also smashed his guitar, flipped the bird, and stormed off. He later reflected on the incident in an interview with Rolling Stone, explaining that he'd been blackout drunk for the set, and shortly thereafter he sought out professional help at a rehab clinic. He also noted that he and his bandmates agreed that they probably shouldn't have been playing at the fest in the first place. As he put it, once a punk, always a punk, is really what it comes down to. In the early 2000s, Creed was one of the biggest bands in the world. Led by throaty singer Scott Stapp, they combined sludgy riffs with spiritually inspired lyrics and scored a ton of big hits in the process. But then they split up in 2004, and that had more than a little to do with Stapp's wild behavior. The breakup was telegraphed by the band's December 2002 show at Allstate Arena in Rosemont, Illinois. According to a source who spoke to Blabbermouth, Stapp was high out of his mind and unable to sing. He also spent most of the set leaning against a riser, lying on his back and sweating intensely. It was so bad that Creed wrote an official apology to their fans that said in part, "The band has heard that you were unhappy with the quality of the recent Creed show in Chicago. We apologize if you don't feel that the show was up to the very high standard set by our previous shows in Chicago. We also understand and appreciate the fact that there has been much concern about Scott's health, and we want to assure everyone that he is doing very well and is taking a much-needed break." It was such a terrible performance that 4 fans sued to get reimbursed for the cost of their tickets and parking fees. Metal guitarist Zakk Wylde got his big break around 1987, when Ozzy Osbourne selected the then 19-year-old New Jersey native to be part of his solo band. He would go on to play on and write for a number of Osbourne's records, and he later formed his own popular group, Black Label Society. Osbourne gave Wylde his start not just in the highest levels of music, but also in extreme partying, as he recalled in a 2019 interview with Jenny McCarthy.
That's when my drinking problem began. But, I drank until then, and then it was just double-fisted from that point on.
Wylde's heavy drinking lasted into his early 40s, when he had to quit due to a disorder that caused potentially fatal clots to develop. Weirdly enough, though, Wylde's prolific drinking actually prevented his premature death. After developing severe leg and knee pain while on tour in 2009, he was prescribed oral blood thinners to prevent blood clots. A mid-tour checkup included a CT scan, which revealed the presence of 3 clots that had already hit his heart and passed through safely. Alcohol thins the blood, and a doctor believed that Wylde's years of drinking had successfully prevented large deadly clots from forming. Guns N' Roses straddled hard rock and hair metal, which was a formula for staggering success. A big part of the group's sound was the thundering percussion of drummer Steven Adler, who fully embraced the substance use element of the rock and roll lifestyle. He was seriously addicted to heroin for 7 years, during which time he cheated death literally dozens of times. On one occasion, he injected a speedball, which is a combination of heroin and cocaine. As he later recalled, "I could feel my face hit the tile floor. I felt my teeth loosen as they broke away from the gums. I felt the lacerations on my face. The last thing I remember was pounding my face into a pool of blood. Rushed to a hospital, Adler was diagnosed with a stroke. He would go on to suffer another heroin-induced stroke, along with a heart attack and approximately 31 hospitalizations for overdoses. He was prescribed an opiate blocker in 1990, which made him violently ill due to the heroin still in his system. Days later, he was summoned to the studio to record with Guns N' Roses. He was so out of sorts that it took him about 25 takes to get his track somewhat right. That's when his frustrated bandmates kicked him out of the band. He eventually turned things around though. In a 2018 interview, he announced, "My health is fabulous. Actually, tomorrow I will have 4 years and 4 months of no drinking, and I haven't done drugs since 2008, so I've never been happier."
If you survive the whole drug thing like what I went through, you feel like changing. It's like enough's enough.
Amy Winehouse emerged as one of the most celebrated new stars of the 21st century by making old music sound fresh. Evoking classic R&B, she packed a deeply soulful voice to sing songs of love, heartbreak, and her struggles with substance abuse. She sold millions of records and won multiple Grammys, but all that success was overshadowed by her personal troubles, which included arrests for drug offenses, a viral video of her smoking what was reportedly crack cocaine, and an emphysema diagnosis. Winehouse's demons tragically got the best of her. In July 2011, she was pronounced dead at her London home. A London coroner found no drugs in her system, though it was determined that she died of alcohol poisoning following 3 weeks of sobriety. She was only 27 years old.